Realizing that, for example, when they show us pink regions, that means that either the atria are contracting or experiencing systole, if you like, the ventricles are being systolic, or they're going through a contraction. And the blood apparently is not leaving because they're pushing against that valve. That makes total sense because that's a one-way valve, and it's designed not to let blood go back into the atrium. That's why I bypass this valve. But why isn't blood then going through my aortic or my pulmonary semilunars? Because these guys are contracting, surely they're pumping blood out, and that's because the pressure's not high enough yet within the ventricle to overcome the pressure or the resistance of the blood trying to push in the opposite direction. But as I continue to contract, right, and start building pressure, I can call this the isovolemic, iso for same, volemic for volume, contraction. That means the ventricle is building pressure, but there is no change in blood volume. And we'll see that on the next coming graph as well. But down here, now I am ejecting blood from the right and left ventricle, which means this is no longer isovolemic contraction, it's simply just blood ejection, because now the pressure here is higher than it is on the other side of the aortic or the pulmonary semilunar valve. But then over here I realize nobody's pink, this is diastole, everybody's relaxing, but apparently there's no blood going from the right atrium into the right ventricle, and the same for the left. That's because, why? The pressure in here is still higher than the pressure in the atrium. And I know that it makes sense that the blood can't go back from the pulmonary trunk or the aorta into the left or right ventricles because that's a one-way valve anyways. The kangaroo pouch, it's designed not to let blood do that anyways. So you're always looking at a comparison between, is the pressure great enough to open up a door, or is the blood pushing against a mechanical valve that's designed not to let the blood go in that direction. Which is what this is kind of showing us. Right? One of the things you got to get practice in doing, I'm going to stress and hound you guys in this class, is being able to read graphs. It will help you tremendously in most of the programs you guys find yourselves in the future. We have blood volume on the x-axis, we have pressure on the left ventricle, right, on the y-axis. So when I follow this black line, I read both the x and the y simultaneously. I'm getting increases in blood volume, but not a whole lot of change in pressure. So when I get to point B, I start seeing the pressure skyrocket, but, right, increasing, but no change in volume. That's my isovolemic contraction phase. And that would be representative of this diagram right here. But then finally we overcome the pressure of the blood in the aortic valve. I get blood ejection, and then I go through a blood or a cardiac relaxation period where now my ventricles are relaxing. Again, a good drop in pressure, but no change in blood volume. If we measure the amount of blood in the heart at the beginning of filling for this left ventricle, we have 65 mils of blood. By the time it begins to contract, trying to build up pressure, we have 135 mils total. So by the time we're done ejecting the blood, right, we go from this volume all the way down to that volume, we've pumped out 70 mils of blood. That is your stroke volume. So make sure you're okay looking at this graph. May have any questions about it, right? And be able to kind of translate where this is in terms of which part of our diagram we're looking at over here, just to kind of make it a little more meaningful for yourselves. All right, well, let's go through and divide cardiac function into heart rates and then stroke volume. All I'm going to talk about in terms of hormones are going to be your thyroid hormone. I'm just going to name them and that's it. This is a short little list. Your thyroid hormones and norepinephrine and growth hormone. Those will have an effect on heart rate. Thyroid, growth, and norepinephrine. We'll kind of see how norepinephrine does what it does a little bit later. But let's focus on this autonomic intervention and ways of altering heart rate. So, This is where it's going to be really important, I think, or beneficial to learn one slide at a time in these PowerPoint lecture notes. Understand the content, be able to talk about it to your dog, your cat, your goldfish, your friend, before you go on and look at the next set of slides. And when you're all done, be able to give a little mini lecture on the factors that affect heart rate to see if you can answer all the questions in the study guide. All right, so factors affecting heart rate. Autonomic nervous system, that means your sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, we then can look at what's known as the cardio-inhibitory center and what's known as the cardio-acceleratory center. The names will give me a pretty good idea of what the heck they do, right? Cardio-inhibit, that means to slow down my heart rate. That's going to be using my parasympathetic nervous system. So let's find that over here in the diagram. We know that the medulla has your respiratory center, it has your cardiac centers. So there's my medulla, all right? I'm not going to give you a diagram and have you label the various parts. Just know this more intellectually, that the medulla contains these groups of nuclei. What am I going to ask you, think? What are nuclei? Do y'all remember?
Clusters of cells.
Close, not clusters of cells, because is a cluster of red blood cells a nuclei?
Cluster of cell nucleus.
No, you're close. You're really close, dude. Cluster of what? A cluster of neurons or some part of a neuron? It's the cluster of neuron somas, right? Not the axons and axon terminals. It is just a group of neuron somas. That's what nuclei are, as long as they are in the central nervous system. So we got to kind of practice our vocabulary. So from the medulla, I'm going to get the vagus nerve. You need to know that. So from the medulla, I get the vagus nerve. It comes down. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, what are the 1,000 words we're getting here? What structures on the heart is the vagus nerve forming a synapse with? The SA node and the AV node. Anybody else? Nope, just those two, right? And you know that there's been SA and AV and Purkinje's. So why aren't they going to the Purkinje fibers? Then you think, well, what do I know? The SA node has a natural rhythm of 80 to 100. AVs, 40 to 60. And Purkinje's are slow. And what does my parasympathetic nervous system do in this case? Well, it's called the cardio-inhibitory. It's probably designed to slow down my heart. Do I need to slow down those already on the slow bus? No. So evolutionarily, don't waste material. I don't need to innervate them. That's why we're only going to the SA and the AV. Now you got to think, I mean, I know my 241 students that had me will know this, or I'm hoping to remember this. Those that had somebody else, I don't know what you were taught in terms of the autonomic nervous system. But you should remember that the parasympathetic nervous system releases acetylcholine, and that acetylcholine is a cholinergic neurotransmitter. Therefore, you're going to have possible cholinergic receptors, specifically either nicotinic or muscarinics. Am I ringing bells for you guys? And since it is the heart, it has to be only muscarinics. So we're releasing acetylcholine that'll land onto a muscarinic receptor. So acetylcholine onto a muscarinic receptor, that will cause your heart rate to slow down. That means right now all of you have a tone of parasympathetic activity going to your heart right now. It's dampening the activity of the SA node from 80 to 100 down to your textbook average of 72 in a sense. And it's also doing the AV node. Well, look at the cardio-acceleratory center. Well, I know the inhibitory is from the medulla, right? And so is the acceleratory. And all we need to worry about for the parasympathetic is from the medulla, we're going to get the vagus nerve coming down to the heart. For the cardio-acceleratory, let's just name the sympathetic cardiac nerve coming from the central nervous system. All right, we'll just make it kind of general. So the sympathetic cardiac nerve coming from the central nervous system. And look where it forms a synapse. SA node, AV node, and what do you think this is trying to talk about? The Purkinje's. Because now we've got to speed everybody up. Even the slowest ones have to be sped up. So it makes sense that we need to form a synapse with all three major groups of autorhythmic tissue. Now, you're going to release norepinephrine. That would be the name of the neurotransmitter. Anybody remember what two possible specific groups of receptors norepinephrine could bind to? Alpha and beta, exactly. Good job. Specifically, it's going to be a beta-1. And we have a slide to kind of reinforce that information. All right, so once I memorize this and I can talk to my cat about it, let's look at how the sympathetic nervous system causes an increase in heart rate. So always take a moment, painful as it may be, to dissect the diagram, right? What is the picture showing me? And it's showing me my phospholipid bilayer cell membrane. Awesome. This is a what? What is this thing? Oh, it's a beta-1 ad. Okay, cool. That's my receptor for norepinephrine. So here comes the pizza slice. It lands on the receptor. So norepinephrine binds to a beta-1 receptor. For right now, just for right now, all you need to know is the following. Norepinephrine binds to a beta-1 receptor that eventually causes, we'll learn all about this later on in the quarter, eventually causes calcium to come into the cell. What kind of a charge is on calcium? It's positive, right? Cell membranes tend to be negative. So when you have a positive ion come in, it tends to make the membrane more positive, right? It's probably easier to reach threshold. So I get a faster heart rate. That's all you need to know from this slide. Do not memorize all of this stuff. And don't even, well, yeah, that one we do need to know. We'll get that in a second. Because we know it increases heart rate. But numbers 1 through 4, 5, don't worry about them just yet. We'll get back to them in a couple of weeks. All right, well, let's see visually in a graph the effect of calcium coming into my cell, making my heart rate speed up. We've got 3 different plots. On the x-axis is time all the way across, right? Time, same amount of time. I have membrane potential on the left. Let's say that this is a heart that is not experiencing any kind of autonomic nervous system effects at all. None zip. And it's apparently giving me 1, 2, 3, 4 heartbeats or 4 action potentials in this unit of time. I can see threshold, and then I can look at this pattern, and can you recognize what kind of a membrane potential this is? Is it contractile, neural, skeletal muscle, or myogenic, or SA node? It's an SA node. You got to be able to recognize that, right? This is your pre-potential here. This is where sodium comes in, right? Through a voltage-gated channel. Calcium's coming in, potassium's leaving, and it's an unstable membrane potential. All right, now that's normal with no autonomic intervention. Then what happens if I then apply ACH to my membrane? Well, that's this case. Well, now I can see right off the bat that I get much fewer heartbeats. I only get 2 action potentials. But what's happened to my cell to understand this? So you do not need to memorize the membrane potential values, all right? But do realize that if this is normal, if I made it more positive or more negative with the application of acetylcholine, made it more negative, now it's dropped below negative 60. And if you remember from math, the slopes relate to rates of change. Oh my God, what a concept, right? I have a much slower rate of change. It takes longer to reach threshold. Therefore, over the same amount of time, I can only have X number of action potentials created. Well, what is acetylcholine doing that makes the cell become more negative? It increases, oh, come back here, shoot, potassium permeability. It causes more potassium to leave the cell. And potassium has a positive charge. That'll make the cell membrane more negative. That means it takes longer to reach threshold. I'll have fewer action potentials. You guys okay with that idea? All right, now let's just turn it around and go the other way. Go back to the top for a second. Negative 60 is normal. Now what if I apply norepinephrine that allows for an increase in positive ions? They're called cations. Usually calcium, sometimes sodium. Well, if more positive charges come in, that should make my membrane potential on average be more positive than normal. And we can see it's more positive than normal. It takes me less time to reach threshold compared to normal. And if it takes me less time, I can have more action potentials in that same period of time than compared to the very top where I have no effects of acetylcholine or no effects of norepinephrine. So now we can graphically see the effect of acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Realize that acetylcholine makes my SA nodes, my AV nodes, more negative than normal, so it takes longer to reach threshold. Norepinephrine causes the SA node, the AV node, and Purkinje's to become a little more positive than normal, so it takes less time. Therefore, I have a faster heart rate. So if this is my heart, and my fingers represent, let's say, the parasympathetic nervous system, I'll go do it this way, and I've got innervation on the SA and AV node, and then I experience an Indiana Jones effect in Temple of Doom, and you rip my heart out, what's going to happen to my heart rate? It'll slow down or speed up. Why? The whys are the most important part. I mean, anybody can guess. It's either going to go up or down, John. I can guess that. But why? You're right. Why? No. Right universe of concept, wrong ballpark. All right? So if this is parasympathetic nervous system, and I rip the heart off, what is the heart no longer being stimulated by? No acetylcholine, right? Which means no more potassium is leaving the heart, which means the heart becomes a little more positive in membrane potentials. I'll have faster action potentials. And this is what probably literally happened in Aztec times with sacrifices. Because they have recorded people still being alive, and so you can rip my heart, I can be looking at it going, holy crap, that's my heart. I'm going to be dead in about 2 seconds. But I'll see it probably speed up. Hypothetically. You kind of, I'm not going to volunteer to see if it actually works, but it's the idea, right? Because remember, that's why they're called autorhythmic. I don't have to be in my body to maintain that heart rate. It's not the vagus nerve that gives me my heart rate. It's the SA nodes and the AVs. The vagus helps to dampen, and the sympathetic nerve helps to, or cardiac nerve helps to speed up. Okay. So that's one thing that affects heart rate, the autonomic nervous system. Be able to talk to your cat about the effects of the parasympathetic, the name of the neurotransmitter, name of receptor, and what it's doing to membrane potential so that it makes sense. And do the same thing for norepinephrine, okay? Category number 2, what other things would affect my heart rate besides my autonomic nervous system? Well, cardiac reflexes. This is a reflex of cardiac tissue. Yes, it will take advantage of the autonomic, but it's stemming from cardiac reflexes. All right, so cardiac centers monitor and adjust cardiac activity. Location, internal carotid, and you got to remember where that is or figure it out, aorta, and right atrium. Within these structures, we have 2 things, something called the baroreceptor. So we make it like a little cartoon of a heart, not a great heart, like a plum. And then we do kind of an aorta with a carotid here, we'll do a brachiocephalic over there. It's going to come up over here and branch. You have within the right atria, just to give you kind of a picture so you can kind of visualize these things. We'll just make chambers here for a second. In the right atrium, and then the carotids, you have these cells. They're a little bit of a depression called the sinus. And these cells are going to do one of 2 things. Some cells monitor pressure, right? Like a barometer measures atmospheric pressure, a baroreceptor measures blood pressure. So these little cells are actually experiencing blood pressure as blood is in the right atrium, and this blood goes to the internal carotid. If you think about it, it's kind of cool. It's like quality control. Because this blood's going to go to my brain, and this blood's going to go everywhere. It's We're kind of looking at the pressure of the blood coming in and the pressure of the blood leaving, heading to the most selfish organ in the body called the brain. Now, look what happens as an automatic response to changes in blood pressure. Response to high blood pressure, your heart rate slows down automatically. If blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes down. All right, now if you were to explain, well, why does heart rate go down, you now know about the cardioinhibitory center. You can tell me the path that would actually lead to the actual drop in heart rates. Now here's the nice thing I like about science. And those of you that have the 241 have already heard this saying. If there's a left, there's a right. If there's an up, there's a down. If there's a black, there's a white. If there's an increase, there's a decrease. If you can understand the first mechanism, then just logically think of the opposite. And it'll help make sense. It makes memorizing a lot easier. You're actually learning rather than just memorizing a bunch of words or processes on a slide. So if I understand really that the idea that with an increase in pressure causes a heart rate to slow down, then what would low blood pressure trigger a response? Heart rate speeds up, and I can even talk about then the sympathetic nervous system leading to an increase in heart rate. So I can explain the mechanism, the actual process of why that works. So that's one reflex, by measuring blood pressure. Along the same areas, we have chemo. Chemo, not radiation therapy, but chemo as in chemical receptors. And they're actually responding to O2 and CO2 and pH in your blood. And they're found in the same places. And if you want to make a different color, to kind of emphasize that, you could, put some more guys right here. And again, they're quality control, but instead of measuring pressure, they're measuring O2, CO2, and pH. Now let's look at it in terms of low O2. So what if the blood coming into here is low on O2? Well, low O2 isn't going to be very helpful for me. That's poor quality blood. So the reflexive response is speed the heart up. Send that poor quality blood faster. So I get more poor quality. It's quantity in a sense over quality. And we'll talk about respiration rates a bit later on to fix that. But now if I understand that low O2 triggers an increase in the heart rate, I know it's going to use the sympathetic nervous system to do that, right? Norepinephrine on a beta-1, calcium comes in, more positive, blah, 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 blah. Then what would high levels of O2 trigger, do you think? Exactly, just the opposite. Think about people that are having a panic attack, right? What do? They have them breathe low quality O2 or high levels of O2? High levels of O2 to saturate the blood to help them get their heart rate to slow down, which helps to lead them to become a little more calmer, a little more at peace. As much as you can, let logic let you finish the majority of the heavy workload. First, memorize that one key example, then just let logic say, well, the opposite must be true for this. Anybody have any questions? Video okay so far? Okay. What's your question, John?
I'm so confused. Wait. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, so that's a fair response, right? For some people, it takes a little while to figure out where they're screwed up anyways, and I totally understand that. What I usually mean by is when I ask that makes sense is at least do the sentences and the concept it agrees with you. You haven't memorized it yet. You don't understand the fine little nuances perhaps, but overall the basic idea is sensible. Then we can work on the more devilish details.
Where are the chemo receptors located?
Same place. They're my little blue things. They're going to be located right next to the baroreceptors.
So if you're breathing in more air, like you're having a panic attack, it's going to lower your...
Well, it
You're
depends.
going to get more quality?
So if I go, for example, I went to Sun Valley over the summer, and if I found myself at 9,000 feet, you guys will learn about this quarter, that higher altitude lowers the O2 levels. So that means my heart rate is going to speed up. The lower the O2, the higher the heart rate is going to go. The higher the O2 content in your blood, the lower the heart rate can become. So I gave you a pure oxygen, and I started to watch your heart rate. I'm going to see the heart rate begin to slow down. Because it's got such high quality blood, I can take my time in delivering high quality. But if I had you hold your breath, and if you could do it long enough, heart rate begins to speed up. because now you're running low on O2, and the heart says, well, or the brain tells the heart, dude, just send that poor quality blood faster, and maybe over time we'll get enough oxygen delivered to the tissues. All right, so those are the two things so far, and this is where you're going to want to take breaks. Maybe after each major concept, take a 5-minute break, talk to your cat about it, maybe draw a diagram of it, and then make a concept map of, all right, what are the two things for the autonomic nervous system? Now I'm on cardiac reflexes. What is a baroreceptor and a chemoreceptor? What are they monitoring? And what do they do when they experience high pressure versus high O2? Now we're on phase 3. Right, phase 3 is atrial reflex, aka the Bainbridge response, or the Bainbridge reflex. Now it's a reflex still, and it will still take and affect the autonomic nervous system. Now let's see what this is going to do. Adjust heart rate in response to venous return. That's the blood coming into the right atrium. So if this is the right atrium, it's going to adjust the heart rate based upon the volume of blood coming in there. So I want you to picture or envision the right atrium as a balloon. And how full is your balloon full of air will determine how fast your heart rate is. So what is this thing going to do? Stretch receptors in the right atrium. Now let's blow the balloon up. Can you envision the balloon's latex getting more and more stretched out, getting thinner and thinner? Right? That's sending signals to the brain saying, we're getting more stretch, we're getting more stretch. That goes to the medulla and says, we need to activate the sympathetic nervous system because I need to get this blood out as fast as I can to allow more blood to come in. So the more blood that comes in, the more stretch you have. The more stretch you have, the more signals go to the medulla, the more you activate the sympathetic nervous system, which releases norepinephrine and triggers a faster heart rate. So more stretch leads to a faster heart rate. That's it. I want to stress that. The atrial reflex only deals with heart rates. That is it. And I'll emphasize that when I get to another issue that deals with something totally different. Right? Stretch receptors in the atria, stretch receptors stretch, stretching signal goes to the medulla, activates sympathetic nervous system, norepinephrine, faster heart rate. So the more stretch, the more heart rates I get. Okay? Walk through your mind just for a second and picture it like a balloon. You blow it up. Let's look at that now compared to the next factors about stroke volume. We're going to come back to the atrial reflex because we're going to compare it to another different response. So if I were a student learning this stuff, I'd go, okay, we're done with this. Let me take about a 5-minute break and come back, and can I talk about all the different things that influence heart rate? Right? I've got an autonomic nervous system, I've got cardiac reflexes, and I have something called the atrial reflex. I talk about each one of those 3 things. Whichever one you stumble with, go back to the notes and work on it and figure it out. Also during the break, think about it. If you have a question, we come back from break, go, okay, wait. I'm still stuck on this before we continue on to the second half of the lecture part. But I need to go through some definitions for you before we get into our break. So now we're going to look at stroke volume. According to this concept map, stroke volume deals with 2 variables, EDV and ESV. Let's go through and assign the meaning of all these abbreviations. On the very top of the slide is a formula, map. It says cardiac output is equal to heart rate times stroke volume. Well, what is cardiac output defined as? It is the amount of blood pumped out of the heart in 1 minute. The amount of blood pumped out of the heart in 1 minute. And they're usually referring to just really the left ventricle, since that's systemic circulation. So you can be a little more snooty and say it's the amount of blood pumped out of the left ventricle in 1 minute of time. And it's usually measured in liters. All right, so that's cardiac output. Heart rate, Well, you gotta think about it. What is heart rate? It's the number of beats per minute. That's all that it is. The number of heartbeats per minute. SV is stroke volume. Stroke volume. It's the amount of blood pumped from the left ventricle. The amount of blood pumped from the left ventricle in one contraction. The amount of blood pumped from the left ventricle during one contraction. Now, EDV, there's two ways to think about it. Let me give you the literal way first, and then the opposite way to think about it second. Literally, EDV is end diastolic, end diastolic volume. That means at the end of relaxation volume. It's how much blood is in the left ventricle at the end of relaxation. So how much blood is in the left ventricle at the end of relaxation? Or diastole if you want. Now think about that. Remember a cardiac cycle. If you're not under diastole, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be contracting. So another way to think about this is, yes, EDV is the amount of blood in the left ventricle at the end of relaxation, or you could say it's the amount of blood just at the beginning of contraction. It's the same thing, just a different perspective. And we're going to walk you through this so it'll be a little more understandable and more user-friendly as well. ESV, right? End systolic volume. End systolic volume. What does that translate into? The amount of blood in the left ventricle at the end of a contraction. Or beginning of relaxation. Either one, because it's the same thing. So the amount of blood at the end of contraction. And remember, we're referring to usually the left ventricle in conversations. But it's the same thing as saying it's the amount of blood at the beginning of relaxation. So let's go back to this little diagram here for a sec. Let's come back here. All right, so here's my left ventricle. Oh, look at that, EDV, end diastolic volume. This is the amount of blood at the end of relaxation or just before you begin your isovolemic contraction. You then do a contraction, contraction, and oh my God, there's ESV. It's the amount of blood, right, at the end of the contracting, right before I begin to go through my isovolemic relaxation. So what is the volume of EDV? How much blood are we talking about? 135 milliliters, exactly. What is ESV? It's 65 milliliters. Okay, and if I subtract 65 from 135, I'm going to get 70 mils. That's your stroke volume, the amount of blood per one contraction. So we'll go through that and say, go back to this. All right, so SV is 70 milliliters. EDV under normal condition, 135. ESV is 65. Okay, then this little math equation isn't quite so scary after all. It says that the amount of blood pumped per contraction is equal to how much blood I start off with, and from that I subtract how much is left over. EDV minus ESV.
We don't need to know those numbers, do we?
Oh, yes, you do.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't every heart different size, though? So it'd be different?
On average, it's 70 mils. Yep. So you've got to commit those numbers to memory.
So that's just the average.
It's just the population average, exactly. All right. Now, Then let's go back to the very top where it says cardiac output. The amount of blood pumped per minute of time is equal to the number of beats per minute times the amount of blood per beat. Okay, that makes a lot of sense now. And we know that stroke volume is really influenced by how much blood is at the beginning and how much is left over. Then really, cardiac output, the amount of blood pumped per minute of time, is equal to the number of beats times how much blood leaves the ventricle. And that is your cardiac output. All right, let me give you guys a 7-minute break. You begin practicing that SV is 70 mils, EDB is 135. All right, think about the factors that affect heart rate. Can you come back and tell me what you're not understanding so I can help catch up that little weak link before we go on to the next part of this material? So I'll see you guys in 7 minutes.
No, I made it.